Sofia Moretti died on a rainy Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, Massimo Moretti had stopped believing in mercy. The funeral was held 3 days later. The church was packed. Politicians came. Businessmen came. Men with blood on their hands and power in their pockets came. But none of them mattered. Massimo stood beside his sister's coffin, dressed in black, staring at the white roses covering the polished wood. Sofia had been 26. Too young, too kind, too alive, and now she was gone. But Massimo felt nothing, not sadness, not grief, only rage, cold, silent, endless rage, because Sofia hadn't died in an accident. She had been murdered, shot execution style on a lonely road outside the city, and according to the evidence, the order had come from one man, Antonio Russo, a rival businessman, a respected man, and the father of a woman named Alina Russo. Massimo stared at the coffin. Then he made a promise, not aloud, not for anyone else to hear, just for Sofia. I'll make them suffer. 3 months later. Alina Russo's life ended without warning, not because she died, because everything she knew was taken from her. The police arrested her father at dawn. News channels exploded with headlines. Business partners disappeared. Bank accounts were frozen. Friends stopped calling. Within a week, the Russo family name became poison. Alina spent those days running between lawyers, police stations, and hospitals where her mother had been admitted after suffering a nervous breakdown. She barely slept, barely ate, barely breathed. And then Massimo Moretti appeared. The first time she saw him, Jorge was in a courtroom hallway. Tall, broad shoulders, dark suit, dark eyes, a face carved from stone. People moved out of his way without being asked. Fear followed him like a shadow. Alina had heard of him before, everyone had, but seeing him in person was different. There was something dangerous about him, something that made the air feel heavier. He stopped directly in front of her. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then he said, "You're Antonio Russo's daughter." Not a question, a statement. Alina swallowed. Yes. His eyes were emotionless. You look like him. Something about the way he said it made her uncomfortable. Before she could answer, he walked away. She watched him disappear down the corridor, not knowing that her life had just changed forever. 2 weeks later, her father died in prison. A heart attack. At least that was the official explanation. Alina didn't believe it. But believing didn't matter. The man was gone. And with him went the last protection she had. The funeral was small. Most people stayed away. No one wanted to be associated with a disgraced family. Alina stood beside the grave after everyone else left. Alone. Broken. Exhausted. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching behind her. Your father got off easy. Her body froze. Massimo. She turned slowly. His black umbrella shielded him from the rain. His expression was unreadable. What? The word barely left her mouth. Massimo stepped closer. My sister is dead. Alina stared at him. I didn't kill your sister. No. His voice was calm. But your father did. My father was innocent. For the first time, emotion flickered across his face. Contempt. I used to think innocent people fought harder. Alina's eyes filled with tears. My father didn't kill anyone. Massimo looked at her for a long moment, then he smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the kind that made people nervous. Maybe. He turned to leave, then stopped. And maybe you'll learn how it feels to lose everything. A chill crawled down her spine. She watched him walk away. And for the first time, she was afraid. Truly afraid. Because something in his voice sounded less like a threat and more like a promise. 3 days later, Alina was kidnapped. It happened outside her apartment. One moment she was carrying groceries. The next, a black van stopped beside her. A hand grabbed her, a cloth covered her mouth. Darkness swallowed everything. When she woke up, she was wearing a wedding dress. For several seconds she thought she was dreaming. Then she saw the room, the expensive furniture, the guards outside the door, and the woman adjusting her veil. What is this? The woman wouldn't meet her eyes. Alina's heart began pounding. What is happening? No answer. The doors opened. A priest entered, then several men, and finally, Massimo Moretti. Alina stood so quickly the chair nearly fell. No. Massimo's expression remained cold. No? No. Her voice cracked. You can't do this. His gaze never wavered. I can. Panic flooded her chest. She backed away. This is Isana. Not Gemashio This is justice. Alina stared at him, and for the first time, she realized he truly hated her. Not the kind of hatred that burns hot and fades, the kind that settles deep inside a person's bones, the kind that destroys lives. Massimo stepped forward. His voice dropped low. So let's begin. And with those 4 words, Alina Russo walked into the darkest chapter of her life. The wedding lasted 12 minutes. 12 minutes. That was all it took for Massimo Moretti to destroy what remained of Alina Russo's life. She didn't say her vows. She didn't smile. She didn't even look at him. She simply stood there like a prisoner being sentenced. Because that was exactly what this was, not a marriage, a punishment. When the ceremony ended, Massimo took her back to his mansion, a sprawling estate overlooking the sea. Beautiful, cold, empty. The kind of place designed to impress strangers rather than comfort its owner. The servants lined up as they entered. No one greeted Alina, no one congratulated her, most wouldn't even look her in the eye. Massimo noticed. He said nothing. Alina noticed that too. And somehow that hurt more. The first week was unbearable. The second week was worse. Massimo barely touched her, barely spoke to her, but his hatred was everywhere, in every order, every rule, every silent humiliation. She wasn't allowed to leave the property. Her phone was taken. Her laptop disappeared. Letters sent to her never arrived. When she asked questions, nobody answered. She had become a ghost inside the mansion, a living reminder of a crime she hadn't committed. One evening, she found enough courage to confront him. He was sitting in his study, a glass of whiskey in one hand, business reports spread across his desk. He didn't look up when she entered. You took my phone. Silence. You cut me off from everyone. Still silence. Anger rose inside her. You kidnapped me. Finally, he looked up. Those dark eyes met hers. Cold. Dangerously cold. And? The single word hit harder than shouting. Alina stared at him. I've done nothing to you. Massimo stood, slowly, deliberately. You share his blood. My father was innocent. His jaw tightened. Get out. No. The word surprised even her. Massimo's eyes narrowed. I said get out. No. For a moment, neither moved. Then he stepped closer, much closer, close enough for her to see the fury beneath his calm exterior. Every time I look at you, he said quietly, I see Sofia. Alina's breath caught. Massimo's voice grew colder. I see my sister in a coffin. Silence. Then, so forgive me if I don't care about your comfort. After that day, things changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but enough. The servants became openly hostile. Meals arrived late. Sometimes they didn't arrive at all. Requests were ignored. Doors were locked. Massimo never gave the orders directly, at least not where she could hear them, but he never stopped it either. And everyone knew what that meant. Weeks became months. Alina grew thinner, paler, quieter. The woman who once argued with him now barely spoke. Massimo noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. But every time a small voice inside him suggested he was going too far. He remembered Sofia, and the voice died. One rainy afternoon, Alina discovered she was pregnant. She found out by accident. A doctor, visiting one of Massimo's elderly relatives, noticed she looked unwell and insisted on examining her. The results arrived 2 days later, pregnant, 7 weeks. Alina stared at the paper for a very long time. A baby, Massimo's baby. Her hands trembled. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, from fear, pure fear, because she knew the man she'd married, knew his hatred, knew his cruelty. And for the first time since the wedding, she had something to lose. She told no one, not the servants, certainly not Massimo. The secret became hers alone. At night, she would place a trembling hand over her stomach, whispering softly, talking to someone too small to hear her. Yet somehow she believed the baby could. Stay strong. A tear rolled down her cheek. Please stay strong. Because she wasn't sure she could. The locked room came later, after a misunderstanding, or perhaps an excuse. One afternoon, a servant accused Alina of trying to contact someone outside the mansion. The accusation was false, but truth didn't matter. Massimo exploded. For the first time since the wedding, she saw genuine rage, not cold hatred, not quiet cruelty. Rage, the kind that terrifies. Before she could defend herself, guards dragged her upstairs, to an unused wing of the mansion, to a small bedroom. The windows were barred, the door locked from outside. No! Panic flooded her chest. No, please. The door slammed shut, and darkness answered. The first day she screamed, the second day she begged. By the third day, she stopped. No one came. Meals were irregular, sometimes once a day, sometimes not at all. Water, bread, occasionally soup, nothing more. Days blurred together, morning, night, silence. Hunger, loneliness, fear, again, again, again. Meanwhile, downstairs, Massimo told himself it was necessary, that she deserved it, that her father deserved worse, that Sofia deserved justice. But late at night, when the mansion was quiet, he sometimes found himself staring toward the upper floor, toward the locked room, and something inside him felt uncomfortable, a feeling he refused to name, because guilt required humanity, and he had spent months convincing himself Alina Russo wasn't someone he needed to care about. Inside the room, Alina sat on the floor, one hand on her stomach, the other clutching a thin blanket. She had become so weak, so painfully weak, but she still whispered to the baby every single night, "You'll be okay." Her voice cracked. "We'll be okay." She wasn't sure whether she was comforting the child or herself. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Inside, hunger twisted painfully through her body. And somewhere deep down, something was beginning to go terribly wrong. The baby was 13 weeks old when Alina collapsed. She didn't know exactly how many days she had been locked inside the room anymore. Time had become meaningless. Morning, night, hunger, pain, then morning again. The room smelled of dust and loneliness. The small tray of food left outside her door barely sustained her. Some days there was only bread. Some days there was nothing. The baby was all she thought about now. Not herself, not Massimo, not revenge, only the tiny life growing inside her. Every night she curled onto her side, placing both hands over her stomach, talking softly, telling stories, making promises, dreaming about a future she wasn't even sure she would live long enough to see. One morning she woke with a sharp pain in her abdomen. She froze. The pain disappeared, then returned, stronger. A small frightened sound escaped her lips. No! Her trembling hand moved to her stomach. The baby. Please, not the baby. She stayed still for nearly an hour. Eventually the pain eased, but fear remained, growing larger every day. Downstairs life continued. Business meetings, phone calls, shipments, money, violence, power. Massimo buried himself in work, anything to avoid thinking, anything to avoid wondering why he kept looking toward the upper floor, anything to avoid remembering the sound of Alina begging the day she was locked away. Because every time he remembered, something inside him twisted, and he hated that feeling. 3 days later, Alina could barely stand. Her vision blurred constantly. The room spun whenever she moved. Her body felt weak, fragile, broken. She hadn't seen sunlight properly in weeks, hadn't spoken to another human being in days. The loneliness was becoming unbearable. But worse than the loneliness was the fear. Fear for the child. Fear that every hunger pain she felt was hurting the baby too. Fear that she was failing the only innocent thing left in her life. That evening she tried to walk to the bathroom. Halfway there, her legs gave out. She crashed onto the floor, Pain exploded through her body. A cry escaped her lips. The room spun violently. She struggled to breathe, tried to get up, couldn't. Then she saw it. Blood. A small amount, but enough. Enough to send pure terror through her chest. No! The word came out as a whisper. No, no, no. Tears streamed down her face. She dragged herself forward, wet fingers clawing against the floor, trying to reach the bed, trying to reach anything, trying to survive. But her body was shutting down. The hunger, the stress, the isolation, the pain, it had all become too much, and slowly, everything went dark. Hours passed. No one came. No one checked. No one cared, or so it seemed, until Massimo climbed the stairs. Not because he was worried, not because he felt guilty, because he was angry, a shipment problem, a betrayal, a bad day. And somehow his thoughts had drifted towards the woman upstairs, the woman he blamed for everything, the woman he intended to remind exactly where she stood. His footsteps echoed through the corridor. The guard straightened immediately. Massimo unlocked the door himself, then pushed it open. The words died in his throat. Alina was lying motionless on the floor, blood beneath her, her skin pale, terrifyingly pale. For a second, his brain refused to process what he was seeing. Then something primal erupted inside him. Alina! He crossed the room in seconds, dropping beside her, shaking her shoulders, no response. His pulse exploded. No, 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 this wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to... Call an ambulance! His roar shook the entire mansion. Now! The hospital became chaos. Doctors rushed around them. Nurses shouted instructions. Machines beeped endlessly. Massimo stood outside the emergency room, frozen for the first time in years, actually afraid. Not of enemies, not of bullets, not of betrayal. Afraid. Because Alina might die. And the realization hit him harder than any punch ever could. He didn't want her to. Hours later, a doctor emerged. The man's expression was grim. Massimo stood immediately. How is she? The doctor hesitated, then asked, You're her husband? Yes. The word felt strange, heavy. The doctor's face darkened. Mr. Moretti. Something cold slid down Massimo's spine. The patient was severely malnourished. Silence. We've rarely seen a condition this severe outside abuse cases. Massimo's jaw tightened. Abuse. The word struck like a bullet. Then the doctor continued, and the world stopped. She was pregnant. Everything inside Massimo froze. Pregnant. The word echoed through his skull. Pregnant. Alina. Pregnant. His child. His baby. Their baby. The doctor looked away briefly, a gesture that somehow made everything worse. We couldn't save it. Silence. Complete. Absolute. Silence. Massimo stared at him, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to move. We couldn't save the baby. The sentence shattered something inside him. Not violently, not dramatically. Quietly. The way ice cracks beneath someone's feet, one fracture, then another, until everything collapses. His child. Gone. Because of starvation, because of stress, because of neglect, because of him. Hours later, Alina opened her eyes. The hospital room was quiet. Soft lights, steady monitors, the smell of medicine. For several seconds she couldn't remember where she was. Then she remembered everything. The room, the blood, the pain, the baby. A strangled sob escaped her lips. No. The door opened. Massimo stepped inside. He looked terrible, exhausted, pale, destroyed. But Alina barely noticed. Her eyes searched his face, looking for answers. And in that moment, she understood. The baby was gone. The truth settled over her like a funeral shroud. Massimo took a hesitant step forward. Alina, she stared at him. Not screaming, not crying, not angry. That frightened him more than anything, because there was nothing left in her eyes, only emptiness. Slowly, she turned her face toward him. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Our child is dead. Massimo felt his knees weaken. Alina continued staring at him, expressionless, broken. Then came the sentence that would haunt him for the rest of his life. You won. Was it worth the price? Silence. Massimo couldn't answer, because for the first time, he saw exactly what he had done, and there was no excuse in the world big enough to hide from it. The question followed him everywhere. You won. Was it worth the price? Massimo heard it when he closed his eyes. He heard it in the silence of his mansion. He heard it during meetings, during phone calls, even in his sleep, especially in his sleep, because every time he remembered Alina's face in that hospital bed, something inside him broke all over again. 3 days later, Alina was discharged. The doctors wanted her to stay longer. She refused. She didn't care about recovery. She didn't care about herself. The only thing she had cared about was gone. The baby. Her baby. Their baby. Dead. Because she had been too weak to protect it. Because she had been trapped. Because she had been starving because of him. Massimo brought her back to the mansion. The same mansion that had become her prison. The same mansion where she had lost everything. As the car stopped outside, Alina stared through the window, expressionless, emotionless, empty. Massimo noticed. The silence terrified him. He almost wished she would scream, almost wished she would hit him. Anything would have been better than this. Because hatred meant there was still something left. This looked like the absence of everything. The servants lined the entrance. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Everyone knew. Everyone had heard. The baby, the miscarriage, the hospital, the truth. And for the first time, they looked at Alina differently. Not with contempt, not with hostility, with pity. Massimo hated that look, because she deserved much more than pity. She deserved justice, and he wasn't sure he could ever give it to her. That night, he ordered the locked room opened. Permanently, he fired the guards assigned to her floor. Then he fired the housekeeper who had ignored her meals. Then another servant, then another. Anyone who had contributed, anyone who had watched, anyone who had known. By midnight, half the staff was gone. It changed nothing. The baby was still dead. Alina barely left her room. Days passed, then weeks. She spoke only when necessary. She ate because doctors insisted. She slept because exhaustion demanded it. But she was no longer living. She was existing. And Massimo watched helplessly. The woman he once blamed for everything had become a shadow. And somehow that hurt more than her anger ever could. One evening, he knocked on her bedroom door, no answer. He knocked again. Nothing. Finally, he entered. Alina was sitting beside the window, watching rain slide down the glass, the exact same way she had been sitting 3 hours earlier. Massimo stood quietly. Did you eat? Silence. His throat tightened. Alina. She didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him, didn't react. And somehow that was worse than hatred. Because hatred requires feeling. This was nothing. Weeks later, something unexpected happened. A man arrived at the mansion. Detective Marco Ricci, the former lead investigator on Sofia Moretti's murder. Massimo almost refused the meeting. Almost. But something in the detective's voice sounded urgent. So he agreed. The meeting lasted less than 10 minutes and changed everything. The detective placed a file on the desk. Massimo frowned. What is this? New evidence. Massimo froze. New evidence. After nearly 2 years. The detective nodded. A witness came forward. Silence. The witness claims Antonio Russo wasn't responsible. The room went completely still. Massimo stared at him. What? The detective swallowed. We believe your sister's murder may have been ordered by someone else. For several seconds, Massimo couldn't breathe. Someone else. Not Antonio Russo. Not Alina's father. Someone else. No. The word left his mouth automatically. The detective slid photographs across the desk. Bank records, phone records, transactions, names, evidence. Enough evidence to make his stomach turn. Because the deeper he looked, the clearer the truth became. Antonio Russo had been framed. Massimo sat alone in his office long after the detective left. The file remained open. The evidence remained spread across the desk. But he wasn't reading anymore. Because his mind had already reached the same conclusion, a conclusion so horrifying he could barely face it. Antonio Russo hadn't killed Sofia. He hadn't ordered the murder. He hadn't deserved prison. He hadn't deserved death. And Alina had been innocent from the beginning. Completely innocent. A violent sound shattered the silence. Massimo realized it had come from him. The glass in his hand had exploded. Blood dripped from his palm. He didn't notice, didn't care. Because another image had appeared inside his mind. Alina, crying, begging, starving, locked away, losing their child. All because he had believed a lie. For the first time since Sofia died, Massimo Moretti fell to his knees. Not because he had lost, not because he had been defeated, because he finally understood the monster he had become. And there was no one left to blame except himself. Meanwhile, downstairs, Alina stood in front of a mirror, slowly packing a suitcase. One shirt, then another, a passport, a few documents, nothing more. No tears, no hesitation, no goodbye. Because she had finally made a decision. The baby was gone, the marriage was dead, and whatever remained of her heart had been buried alongside her child. Tomorrow morning, she was leaving. Forever. She didn't know that, upstairs, Massimo had just discovered the truth, and that for the first time since Sofia's death, he was terrified of losing someone. Not his empire, not his power, not his money. Her. But some realizations come too late, and some mistakes cost far more than the people who make them are willing to pay. Massimo didn't sleep. Not that night, not after the detective left, not after learning that Antonio Russo had been innocent, not after realizing he had destroyed an innocent woman because he wanted someone to blame for Sofia's death. The file remained open on his desk. Every page felt like a knife, every photograph, every statement, every piece of evidence. Proof. Proof that Alina had suffered for nothing. Proof that their child had died for nothing. Proof that he had become the very monster he once swore to destroy. At 4 in the morning, another name appeared repeatedly throughout the investigation: Vittorio Bellini, a powerful businessman, a long-time ally of several Mafia families, a man who had publicly mourned Sofia's death, a man who had attended her funeral, a man Massimo had trusted. The deeper investigators dug, the uglier the truth became. Vittorio had ordered Sofia's murder, not Antonio Russo, not the Russos. Vittorio, because Sofia had accidentally discovered evidence linking him to a massive money laundering operation. She had become a liability, so he eliminated her, then framed Antonio Russo, and Massimo had swallowed the lie whole. The sunrise found Massimo staring at Sofia's photograph. She smiled back at him from the frame. 23 years old, bright, kind, alive. His little sister, the person he had failed most. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Boss? One of his men entered, pale, uneasy. Massimo immediately sensed something was wrong. What? The man swallowed. Mrs. Moretti. Massimo's heart stopped. What about her? She's leaving. The office disappeared around him. His chair scraped violently backward. What? Her bags are packed. Massimo was already moving, already running. Alina stood beside the front entrance, a single suitcase at her feet. Simple, quiet, final. The morning sunlight illuminated her face. For the first time in months, she looked calm. Not happy. Never happy. But calm. The kind of calm that comes after surviving the worst thing imaginable. The kind of calm that comes when someone has finally accepted there is nothing left to save. A car waited outside. The driver loaded her suitcase. Massimo appeared at the top of the staircase, breathing hard, panic flooding his chest. Alina! She didn't turn around. The silence hurt. Massimo descended the stairs, fast, too fast, almost stumbling. Alina? Still nothing. Finally, she looked at him, and the emptiness in her eyes nearly destroyed him. Because she wasn't looking at her husband. She wasn't looking at the man who hurt her. She wasn't looking at anything. It was the look people gave strangers, people they no longer cared about. I'm leaving. Her voice was calm, simple, final. Massimo felt sick. I know. Silence. I know the truth. That got her attention, only slightly. The truth? Massimo nodded. Your father didn't kill Sofia. The words hung in the air. Alina froze. For the first time in weeks, emotion appeared in her eyes. Shock, disbelief, pain. So you finally figured it out? The bitterness in her voice was unbearable. Massimo looked away, because he deserved it. Every word, every ounce of hatred. My father died in prison. Her voice trembled, not from weakness, from grief. Do you know what he kept saying during our last visit? Massimo couldn't answer. He kept saying he was innocent. Tears filled her eyes. He begged me to believe him. A tear slid down her cheek. And I did. Another. But nobody else did. Silence. My father died alone. Massimo felt something inside him collapse. Because there was nothing he could say. No apology big enough. No punishment severe enough. No amount of guilt that could resurrect the dead. I'm sorry. The word sounded pathetic. Worthless. Tiny. Alina laughed. A broken sound. Almost cruel. Sorry? She looked directly at him. My father is dead. Another step. Our baby is dead. Another. My life is ruined. Her voice cracked. And you're sorry? Massimo couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't defend himself, because she was right. Suddenly, another voice interrupted. Boss! Everyone turned. One of Massimo's security men was sprinting toward the mansion, terrified, holding a phone. Boss, we found something. Massimo frowned. What? The man stopped, trying to catch his breath. The truck. Silence. Massimo stared. What truck? The truck from 6 months ago. Alina froze. Colour drained from her face. Because she remembered. Of course she remembered. The day she had almost died, months earlier. Before the pregnancy, before the locked room, before everything became worse. A truck had jumped the sidewalk while Alina was walking through the city. It had missed her by inches. Everyone called it an accident. A drunk driver, bad luck, wrong place, wrong time. Massimo had barely thought about it afterward. Until now. The guard's face was pale. It wasn't an accident. Silence. What are you talking about? We found proof. The man swallowed. The truck was ordered. Massimo's pulse exploded. By who? The answer changed everything. Vittorio Bellini. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Because suddenly every piece fit together. Sofia. Antonio Russo. The truck. Alina. Everything. Vittorio hadn't just murdered Sofia. He had tried to kill Alina too. Because Alina had spent years publicly defending her father's innocence. If she kept digging, she might have uncovered the truth. So Vittorio tried to silence her. Forever. Then his phone rang. A secure line. One used only by trusted informants. Massimo answered immediately. The voice on the other end was shaking. Boss? What? We have a problem. A pause. Then, Bellini knows we've reopened Sofia's case. Massimo's stomach dropped. What else? The answer came instantly. He knows Alina is alive. Silence. The voice lowered. And he just put a price on her head. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Massimo turned toward Alina, pure terror crashing through him. Because suddenly, leaving wasn't the danger. Staying alive was. And somewhere in the city, the man who murdered Sofia, the man who framed her father, the man who tried to run her down with a truck, had decided to finish what he started. And this time, he wouldn't miss.